it's so good to see you here. I'm really touched and heartened by each of you guys showing up, because I know that you have choices at WonderCon, and there's so much else going on here, so the fact that you came is really lovely, and I appreciate it. Thank you. This is so interesting to hear Curtis talk about all of this, and I do love this series, Spirit of Star Trek, because I think that, well, there's such an innate spiritual longing, I believe, in all of us, and it takes place, and it takes the shape of different, it takes shape in a lot of different ways. But it's so interesting hearing you talk from such a technical standpoint, Curtis. I do know some of that, and I do agree so thoroughly with all that Curtis said, but I think probably what I can bring to the table more than the intellectual pursuit, because Curtis definitely has that nailed. Not that I don't, but
she has it more nailed than she lets on. Let me tell you.
Thank you. I don't mean that I don't. I think that what I do, though, it keeps tugging at me to say is something that Curtis said earlier on in the conversation, which is, don't walk out of the room when I tell you what I do for a living. I'm a pastor. And I know that well. I really do. From my standpoint, not to talk too much, but I used to be on leadership at a church, and I got extremely hurt, frankly. I got really turned off with organized religion, frankly. And I think what I would have to say about all of this as a whole is that people do have such an intense longing, but they don't know where to find the satisfaction for it, you know? It's certainly difficult to walk into church and trust that you're going to get anything real. Nothing against churches per se, but a lot of times it just doesn't happen, I think. You know, and so I think people do turn to each other, rightly so, and to popular culture, and to places that you can trust to get understanding and truth, and just the spiritual answers that we all long for, you know? Can anybody relate to that? I think it's the absolute essence of life, and it doesn't surprise me that Star Trek has always been so popular and resonated so profoundly with so many people, partly because, well, I think fully because of the amazing messages, the allegory, the metaphors, and because the allegories and metaphors are so beautiful in Star Trek particularly, infinite diversity and infinite combinations, the prime directive, all of those things that speak of love, which I feel, and I've always felt, is all there is, you know? And that, you know, I think God himself is probably extremely embarrassed about what goes on in a lot of organized religion, but I think the bottom line is really always love. And I think there's a lot of that in Star Trek, and a lot of it in science fiction. So that's kind of why I wanted to get on board here, because I know enough to know that nothing else really matters, and I've had enough of everything to realize that that's all that counts. It's not your job, it's nothing. It's really the amount that you love the people around you, and the amount of I don't know, it's just the amount of love that is exchanged in your life that really matters. So I think, sorry, I'm rambling, but that's such a strong message. That's why the show is so popular.
And there's also, Spirit of Star Trek, there's a strong audience interaction component that we'll be getting to. But Chase, I have a few questions for you, as you might imagine. Deep Space Nine has been described as the darkest of the Star Trek series. The gap between good and evil oftentimes in Deep Space Nine was a little bit narrower. We dealt with characters who were a little bit grayer in Deep Space Nine. I personally find that quite intriguing. A lot of people, I've heard it said that the Deep Space Nine betrayed Gene's vision because it was so dark. As a member of the cast, how do you feel about that? With DS9, were we consistent with the Roddenberry vision, or were we off the beam a little bit?
I do think it was consistent in terms of Star Trek for our time. I mean, it was a much more idealistic world, I think, when Gene was creating Star Trek. And, since then, we've seen a lot as a country, as a culture, across the world, I think. There's been there's just been huge incidents of tragedy and war and all of that, that I think, not that there wasn't before that, but I think that people are more, people's dark side is more integrated these days than it used to be perhaps in the 50s. You know what I'm saying? Or the 60s. I think these generations need that complexity, and I think that it resonates in us as individuals because we are so complex and we all have to reconcile our dark side to our light side. I think we all have both, you know?
Yeah, and we're seeing now a lot of science fiction where it is all about the grays. I would argue that Galactica was very much about the grays. Firefly was about the grays. Babylon 5. So that notion that we need to explore these archetypes